Sometimes a moment lasts less than a second, but says more than a whole speech. That is precisely what happened during Mark Carney's latest press conference. Before the answers, before the policy details, before the charts and plans, there was a smirk, one brief expression that quickly spread across social media and newsrooms. It was calm, it was controlled, and it sent a clear message. Canada has moved on.
Follow-up question is on U.S.-Canada trade. You've said that you want to get the best deal for Canada and that you're not rushing to any sort of deal. Do you get the sense that other countries regret the deals that they've made with President Trump?
It's a question for them. Look, I think this is what I'll say about other countries. Every country wants to do a deal with Canada. Or if they have a relationship with Canada, they want to deepen that relationship with Canada. And this is a real opportunity for us. Of course, we want to further improve the existing trading relationship with the United States. We stand ready to re-engage when they are.
For years, Canadian politics and trade policy were shaped around the United States. Every election, every deal, every dispute seemed to revolve around Washington. Trump's presidency only intensified that dynamic. Tariffs, threats, renegotiations, and public pressure forced Canada into a reactive position. What Carney showed in this press conference was that the reactive era is over. The power of the moment didn't come from the smirk alone. It came from what followed. Once the political noise was dismissed, Carney turned to substance. And that's where the fundamental shift became impossible to ignore. Carney announced that Canada is ending its decades-long economic dependence on the United States, not with slogans, not with vague promises, but with a clear national strategy.
But at the same time, we're going to do a few other things. First and foremost, build this economy, to be masters in our home, maîtres chez nous, and invest and make sure our strategic industries are there when we need them.
Canada's major industries, such as steel and lumber, have faced years of pressure from foreign dumping, unstable trade rules, and price manipulation. Carney announced firm limits on foreign steel imports designed to protect domestic producers and Canadian workers. The goal is simple. If Canada builds, Canada should benefit. He made it clear that Canada will no longer allow cheap foreign steel to flood the market and undercut local production. Similar measures have been used by the European Union and other major economies in recent years.
You mentioned in French that you had a conversation with Donald Trump over the last 24 hours.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that, please? And also, when you go to Washington next week, will you bring up with him the pain that our sectors are currently facing and talk about re-engaging?
I'll bring up with him what I bring up with him when I see him. These are points I do make to him. My exchange with the president yesterday was not newsworthy.
So it wasn't about...
I just responded to a question, wasn't newsworthy.
That's it. When another reporter asked about his recent interaction with Donald Trump, Carney shut it down without hesitation. He said it wasn't newsworthy. That was it. No drama, no follow-up, no spin. Just a clear signal that Canada is done treating Trump-centered politics as the main story. This wasn't disrespect. It was maturity, and it marked a clear turning point. What made that moment truly striking was the confidence behind it. Carney didn't dodge the question out of caution, nor did he promote it for effect. He dismissed it because it simply didn't warrant a response. In a political era where leaders often dance around Trump for relevance, Carney's refusal to play along felt bold, even defiant for pro-Trump media.
This is an important day for Canada's workers. We know the world's changing. We know that this decades-long process of our ever closer economic relationship between Canada and the United States has ended. And as a consequence of that, many of our strengths have become our vulnerabilities, particularly in those industries that are most tightly integrated with the United States. Headline, last year, 75% of our exports went to the U.S. 90% of our lumber exports went to the U.S. 90% of our aluminum exports went to the United States. 90% of our steel exports went there, all bound for a single market that has changed. Overall, for the Canadian economy, we estimate that U.S. tariffs and the uncertainty that they're creating will cost Canadians around 1.8% of GDP. That's about $50 billion lost from our economy, or the equivalent of $1,300 for every Canadian. And this is happening fast. It's a rupture, which means that our economic strategy needs to change dramatically and rapidly.
Carney's message was direct. Canada will invest in its own supply chains rather than wait for Washington to change its mind. These announcements weren't framed as temporary relief. They were framed as rebuilding. Carney spoke about restructuring domestic supply chains so that Canadian resources are processed in Canada by Canadians for Canadian growth.
Back in July, we restricted foreign steel imports entering Canada's market, expanded training and income support for steel workers, and provided liquidity relief for businesses.
This is a significant shift away from the export-first mindset that has dominated policy for decades. He made it clear that resilience is now the priority, not cheap access, not short-term convenience, long-term strength. Then came the global angle.
In September, we launched a comprehensive industrial strategy with new reskilling programs, a new $5 billion strategic response fund to help businesses pivot to new markets, and we announced that we would create a new Buy Canadian policy across federal agencies. We also reduced red tape and increased loan limits to help large firms access the liquidity that they need. These measures are working.
What made this press conference different from the others was the tone. There was no defensiveness, no anger, no sense of insecurity. Carney didn't attack Trump. He did not mock him. He didn't even engage with him. He simply treated him as irrelevant to Canada's future direction. That is why the smirk mattered.
So far, they prevented more than 14,000 Canadians from losing their jobs. More broadly, across our economy, employment is rebounding after the early impacts of the trade war. More than 120,000 total jobs have been created since March.
It was a quiet act of leadership, signaling that Canada's agenda is no longer reactive or dependent on American political power. By drawing that line so cleanly, Carney showed a rare kind of courage, the willingness to move forward without asking for permission, applause, or validation from the noise south of the border.
What we're doing today is to reinforce that momentum with new strengthened measures to accelerate the transformation of the Canadian steel and lumber industries, to build strong domestic demand for their products, and to empower their workers and businesses to seize new markets at home and abroad. So these new measures focus on three core objectives. First, to further limit foreign steel imports so as to increase domestic demand for Canadian steel producers. Second, to make it easier to buy and build with Canadian steel and lumber. And third, to invest in workers and businesses so they have the tools and the resources that they need to drive this industrial transformation. So let me start with limiting foreign steel imports to ensure that our steel producers have a bigger share of our market. Doing so will unlock hundreds of millions of dollars in domestic demand for those producers.
For many Canadians, that shift felt overdue. Carney offered them a certainty without any hollow promises. No shouting, no insults, no drama. Just a smirk, a shutdown, and a plan. And that is why this moment will be remembered. Not because of what was said about Trump, but because of what Canada said about itself.